You're listening to the Thoughts for Living podcast, coming to you from the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, Montgomery, Alabama. Hello, and welcome to the Thoughts for Living podcast. We hope all is well with you and yours. We hope everyone is still virus-free and will remain so. We're so glad you've taken time to join us here on this 26th day of February 2022. A couple of things we'd like to point out. We're coming up to the end of our celebration of Black History, but we know it's an ongoing celebration. So we'd like for you, if you, in your leisure, take a look at some of the sites that are available to us for further information about our culture and life and history at OSLA, the study of African American life and history. You would like to go to their website, and also the UN website is hosting the Decade of People of African Descent. These are certainly ongoing resources that you can use in developing a better understanding of African American culture. Today, we'd like to talk about Black maternal and infant mortality. And of course, we're going to use critical race, not only critical race theory, but we also use a theory that we developed, ecological consciousness theory, in order to bring an analysis to some of the articles and research we're seeing surrounding the issue of Black maternal and infant mortality. We're in the state of Alabama, and the governor here did a really not so surprising thing in that they authored some of the first anti-abortion legislation in the U.S. And for almost 2 decades, the Alabama House and Senate have been controlled by Republicans who constantly demonstrate their allegiance to business and to profits by using neoliberal valuations. And they advertise and they promote individualism. They advertise and promote competition and personal achievement, except when it comes to women and their bodies. As we see more and more abortion becoming an issue, we hear little from states or even federal jurisdictions about infant and maternal mortality. And when we say infant and maternal mortality, we're talking about the fact that Black mothers and Black children die while trying to give birth. So what we're looking at today is that some of the same individuals who talk about right to life, who say they are pro-life, who are anti-abortion, we find little from them about addressing the issue that Black women and Black children, particularly, face death almost at 3 times that of European American women. And we want to talk about that and think about that and maybe come to some ideas about why that is the case. While abortion remains nationally legal, even though we have a Texas has put something that will be addressed by the Supreme Court. Children and mothers die during pregnancy and after birth, and many die needlessly from preventable circumstances. And these preventable deaths, by and large, seen through ecological consciousness theory, result from white supremacist ideals that have been historically have valued white life and devalued black and brown lives. So we want to talk about that today and use some research that has gone forth. One of the sources that we use is Black Agenda Reports. And according to its editor, who just passed not too long ago, the great Glenn Ford, he reported that the United Nations population division rates the U.S. as 38th in infant mortality in the world between Brunei and Belarus. And researchers investigating infant mortality rates in rural and urban areas in the United States in 2014, they found that infant mortality decreased per 1,000 births in rural counties from 6.55 to 6.20 as urbanization increased, and fell to 5.44 in larger urban suburbs. Well, this simply means that rural areas had higher infant mortality rates than large urban suburban areas. And so we find that despite the geographical space, whether it's urban or whether it's rural, black women experience the highest infant mortality, more than double that of European Americans. Globally, the United States is ranked 152 with 5.8 deaths per 1,000 births. That's just above Cuba at 161 with 4.4 deaths per 1,000 births. And so when utilizing the pregnancy-related mortality ratio, the CDC finds that Black and Native American mothers lost their lives at 42.8, or for Black women, that was 1,460 women, while only 13.0 white mothers died in this tragic way. Now, these deaths, they don't have to take place. Research from the CDC shows that reducing pregnancy-related deaths requires reviewing and learning from each death and improving women's health and reducing social inequities across their lifespan, as well as ensuring quality care for pregnant and postpartum women, which is to say, in order to resolve these deadly outcomes, right, efforts that are put forth to argue about abortion rights must help establish high-quality healthcare services, right? High-quality housing, paid parental leave, and livable incomes for the mothers of our children here in the U.S., just as most of the so-called developed world does for its parents, right? And yet, research reported by the Centers for American Research states African American women who initiated prenatal care in the first trimester still had higher rates of infant mortality than non-Hispanic white women with late to no prenatal care. Now, this may be due to persistent racialization, as they further state current health status, health history, stress, and experiences of racism may contribute to maternal and infant mortality when coupled with lower quality prenatal care. So we can see that this is a major issue for black women and children. The fact that we could lose almost 2,000 black mothers during birthing is phenomenal. And we hear little from the federal or state agencies about this loss of life, not only for black mothers who are trying to give birth and bring their children to term, but also for the infants who also perish in these situations. Why is it that we hear so little from those who claim to be for life and anti-abortion about maternal and infant mortality? Is it because black and brown women and children die in much greater numbers than European mothers? According to our research, which is framed by ecological consciousness theory, women generally, but black women specifically, have been and are continued to be demonized in U.S. society. I want to say that again. Black women have been historically and continue to be demonized in U.S. history. For example, the scientific and educational literature combined with governmental and civic discourses specifically associated with African American women and girls collectively normalize cultural, racist, and misogynistic notions of the Jezebel, Sapphire, and Mammy. These are well contemporized caricatures, right? Caricatures just like the welfare queen and the crack mother and the teenage baby mama. Right? We've heard these notions for years in trying to describe black women, black and brown women in this country. And one overwhelming assumption about black women, according to Rhodes, who did this particular research, is that they intentionally become pregnant so that they can increase their governmental subsidy, thus denigrating black reproduction. Yet, unwed white pregnancies are generally viewed not as illegitimate, but rather denoting or showing reproductive rights, which was exemplified in the media coverage of Bristol Palin. You remember her? She was the daughter of Sarah Palin, who ran for vice president in 2008. And her daughter, Bristol, gave birth to 2 children out of wedlock. But no one denigrated her for having children out of wedlock. But even more appalling for Rhodes and soul-piercing was a 2011 billboard erected at a major intersection in New York, which displayed the photograph of an elementary-age black girl in a anti-abortion promotion under the heading, and get this, the most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb. This is what this anti-abortion advertisement at a main intersection in New York, a little black girl under the heading, the most dangerous place for an African American is in the womb. Really? So the most dangerous place for a black person is in the body of a black woman. Now, though facts may be reported to provide information and mobilize support in mass, African American girls and mothers in U.S. society are demonized. And really, black women are placed in a can't win situation, right? They're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't, right? Because of white supremacist attitudes and values about black women, if they bring their children to term, then they're having too many children. But if they have to make the hard decision not to bring that child to term, then they're demonized for aborting a pregnancy. So how are black women going to win in this type of scenario? They're either killing babies or they're having too many. Additionally, the hatred that's put upon black women appears inescapable because, as intersectionality tells us, which was a theoretical framework developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, black women are mistreated not only because they're black, but also because of their gender status, being female, and because of their class status, if it turns out they're poor. You know, a lot of people, and I understand all of the groups and organizations who work diligently to address issues confronting black men and boys. And this is not to minimize any of these organizations' work, because certainly men and boys are under attack and have been. But in a paternal white supremacist society, okay, black men can only be oppressed based on their race and based on their social status, whether they have money or not. Maleness in this society is promoted above femininity. So that is to say, black men can be oppressed in two categories: because of their race and because of their social status. But black women can be oppressed in three categories. They can be oppressed because they are women. They can be oppressed because they are poor. And they can be oppressed because they are black. I would argue that among the most oppressed people on the planet Earth are black women. Among the, if not the most. Now, I know some people say, well, let's not play the game of who's being abused. Well, it's not a game. We have the evidence here that even when black women have status, we are still dealing with black maternal and infant mortality that's at least twice as high as white women. Some of you may be aware that Serena Williams, obviously she has status, but did you know she almost died in childbirth? This is unacceptable, and black women are being made to bear the brunt of oppression in this society. We could simply illustrate this point that Crenshaw talks about called intersectionality. If you look at a traffic intersection, right? And generally it's regulated, right? And potentially at a traffic intersection, one could get hit from any direction, right? So if you're black, you can get hit from the back. If you're female, you can get hit from the left. If you're economically exploited, you can get hit from the right. Or, God forbid, you are black, female, and poor, you get hit from the front, right? And the intersection is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Black women find this kind of oppression in homes, in schools, in churches, at work, in the media, or for that matter, everywhere they move and have their being. Right? Viewed this way, the lives of black women are constantly in danger. Now, women in general, because white women are oppressed in a patriarchal white supremacist society, but that's just two levels. They can get it on their agenda and they can get it on their class, but they're certainly not going to be oppressed because they're white women. So we state here again, and we know the white male, the same for him. He can be oppressed because of his status. That's it. But being male and being white in a white supremacist society, he's got a green light. So if that be the measure, black women are the most oppressed people in the United States of America. Continually. Because the vast majority of our sisters are not rich. They're being oppressed because they're women. They're being oppressed because they're poor. And they're being certainly oppressed because they are black. And none of these issues can any human being control. Last time I checked, nobody gets to choose who they're born to. No one gets to choose to whom they come into the world. No one gets to choose how they come into the world. No one gets to choose whether they're born female, poor, and black. And how many listening would raise their hand, knowing the type of country that we live in, and would choose to be born black, poor, and female? Dare say none. And the other issue that coincides this demonization of black women, the question would have to be, can you demonize a black woman and not demonize her child? Now, if we view it in this way, black infant mortality, right, viewed this way, might help us explain why CNN and the USA Today reported in August of 2020 that black newborns are 3 times more likely to die when looked after by white doctors. Did you know that? This was released in 2020. I never heard that. Had to do some research. The research entitled Physicians, Patient Racial Concordance and Disparities in Birthing Mortality for Newborns. The research was done by Greenwood, Hardman, Huang, and Sojourner. And it says that when black newborns are cared for by black physicians, the mortality penalty they suffer as compared with white infants is halved. Strikingly, these effects appear to manifest more strongly in more complicated cases and when hospitals deliver more black newborns. So where you have hospitals that deliver a lot of black babies and those births are complicated, have complications, when you have a black doctor, the chances of your child dying is cut in half. So, ecological consciousness theory would suggest that the positionality of privileged groups that lead to a worldview and actions that reinforce their qualities as normal and others' traits as anomalous and inferior can be termed othering. I'll say that in a little bit simpler language. The European American worldview that demonizes black women and children and their children is a value system that sees black women and children as other than white. This is where we get the word other, or when you use the term other, you're already talking about two things, right? Because you can't have a other if you don't have two, right? And that's like the word or, right? You got to have, if it's this or, you got to have at least two. So the fact that we have the word other, othering is in the research literature, and it describes a European American worldview that sees non-white people as others. Okay? Now, according to Briscoe, othering is a consequence of a century of mostly well-off white men as the writers of social science defining their own and others' identities, which propagates a supremacist universalism for the writers' group and segregates all others. For instance, we have research by Gayton, who suggested that the Americanization programs that was aimed at Latinas and Latinos were historically used to transform students' language, dress, and recreational activities and family traditions and home life. Right? So if you are deemed a other, right, you are accorded different treatment relative to the privileged group. The privileged group being who? The people that control the society. So in another example, you could use native peoples, right? White social hegemony was forcefully imposed on native peoples through schools that viewed native culture as problematic with regard to educative approaches. Some instructors sought to civilize and make native children less Indian, distinguishing their cultural valuing of the collective versus white American dogmatized individualism. So, sisters and brothers, now we can see that a worldview that sees people of colors as others, as non-white, and therefore what? Non-human. And that type of worldview disregards people of colors and black people specifically. It disregards our culture. It disregards our feelings. It disregards our thoughts. It disregards our concerns. And we end up with what? Black women and children dying at twice the level of non-Hispanic white people. In short, according to ecological consciousness theory, white European worldview sees people of color as only members of a group, but they see themselves as individuals. So that racism and privilege relates to individual actors and is not representative of collective whiteness or systemic racism, as though European Americans do not constitute a group relative to racism and privilege. But they are a group relative to what? When they say American, when they say exceptionalism, when they say we are the greatest nation on the earth, then they are a group. So it seems like what most European Americans deem good, they are a group. But to what they know is wrong and is bad, then all of a sudden they become individuals and have no responsibility or accountability for the results. This is why Black maternal infant mortality is not discussed. It's not addressed. Even when you have supposed all of these conservatives who are supposed to be pro-life and anti-abortion, but we hear nothing about the Black women and children who are dying trying to give birth. Where is the love for Black women and children? Black women who are trying to bring their children to term and are dying. Where are the resources being garnered to address the issues that underlie Black women and children dying during birth? It seems to me that it's hard for European Americans to try to reconcile this trying to hold individualism on the one hand, and then trying to hold a group understanding on the other, trying to see themselves as individuals when the whole of life is an interrelated, interconnected process. I think for many European Americans, that's causing a certain kind of cognitive disconnect. I would go so far as to say, using the lens of ecological consciousness theory, that, when you all see all the Karens, I don't know what they call the guys, I guess they Kens. When you see all these people who want to arrest, Black folks for having a barbecue or selling water, or this sister in New York who's going to take this boy's iPhone because she just knew he had stolen her iPhone. There's no way he could own one. I think some of this behavior is about people not able to hold these two ideas in proper relationship. I think it's simply driving a whole lot of European Americans mad. I think that's what we saw on January 6th. We've seen people running amok who've actually, and I'm not excusing any behavior, but you would have to say it was on the verge of madness and insanity. Because most people in their right mind would never have undertaken such a foolish event. You're listening to the Thoughts for a Living podcast